Eleanor's knees threatened to buckle as she faced the stone-faced rancher who had purchased her as his mail-order bride. Her throat so dry she couldn't speak. The tiny blonde girl who appeared in the doorway clutching a tattered doll would determine whether Eleanor had found salvation or damnation on this desolate prairie. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go! The prairie wind whispered through the tall grass as the stagecoach rumbled over the rutted dirt road, each jolt sending fresh waves of terror through Eleanor Bennett's body. Her hands, encased in white cotton gloves now stained with dust, clutched the single valise on her lap as though it contained all the courage she'd need for what lay ahead. Perhaps it did. Inside were the few possessions she'd brought from Boston: a Bible, 2 dresses, her mother's locket, and the letters from Mr. Wyatt Morgan, the stranger who would soon be her husband. "Last stop, miss." "Morgan Ranch," the driver called, his voice as rough as the terrain they'd traversed. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. 6 weeks of travel had somehow not been enough time to prepare for this moment. The stagecoach lurched to a halt and she peered through the small window at what would be her new home. The ranch house stood sturdily against the vast Kansas sky, neither grand nor humble, a testament to practicality rather than pretension. A windmill creaked nearby, and somewhere a dog barked in greeting or warning, she couldn't tell which. "Miss, we ain't got all day," the driver prompted, already unloading her trunk from the roof. Eleanor stepped down, her legs unsteady after the long journey. The vastness of the open prairie made her feel small, vulnerable. In Boston, buildings hemmed you in, protected you. Here, the endless sky threatened to swallow her whole. "Mr. Morgan said to drop you at the house," the driver said, setting her trunk in the dust. "Paid in advance," he did. With a tip of his hat, he climbed back onto his seat. "Good luck to you, miss." The words hung ominously in the air as the stagecoach pulled away, leaving her alone. Alone, except for the tall figure now emerging from the barn. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs as Wyatt Morgan approached. His letters had been straightforward, almost businesslike. 34 years old, ranch owner, widower with a 5-year-old daughter, seeking a respectable woman to be wife and mother. The arrangement was clear marriage in exchange for passage west, a home, security. What the letters hadn't conveyed was his imposing presence. Wyatt Morgan stood over 6 feet tall, his shoulders broad beneath a cotton shirt rolled up at the sleeves. His face, partially shadowed by his hat, revealed little emotion, but his eyes, a startling blue against his sun-darkened skin, assessed her carefully. "Miss Bennett," he said, removing his hat. His voice was deep, but softer than she'd imagined. "Welcome to Morgan Ranch." Eleanor managed a small curtsy, feeling foolish even as she did it. Such formalities seemed absurd in this wild place. He nodded toward her trunk. "I'll get that. House is ready for you." The silence stretched uncomfortably between them as he lifted her trunk with ease. Eleanor followed him toward the house, anxiety coiling tighter with each step. What had she done? Traveled halfway across a continent to marry a stranger? A man who'd lost one wife already? She knew nothing about ranching, nothing about raising a child. Her sheltered upbringing in her aunt's Boston home had prepared her for society parlors, not prairie homesteads. The front door of the house opened before they reached it, and a small figure darted out. Eleanor's breath caught at the sight of the little girl with golden hair that caught the sunlight. In her arms, she clutched a rag doll nearly as big as herself. "Papa!" the child called, then stopped short when she saw Eleanor. Her eyes, the same striking blue as her father's, widened with curiosity. "Sarah," Wyatt said, his tone gentling, "this is Miss Bennett. Remember I told you she was coming to stay with us?" The child nodded solemnly, studying Eleanor with unnerving intensity. "You're pretty," she finally declared. "Prettier than Papa said." A flush crept up Eleanor's neck. "Thank you," she murmured, uncertain how to interact with this small, forthright person. Wyatt cleared his throat. "Let's get inside. Mrs. Carson made supper before she left. She'll be back tomorrow to help you get settled." The interior of the house surprised Eleanor. She'd expected roughness, but found order and modest comfort instead. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace at one end and a solid wooden table at the other. Shelves lined one wall, holding actual books alongside practical items. 2 doors presumably led to bedrooms. "Very nice," she said, meaning it. "Sarah, show Miss Bennett where to wash up," Wyatt instructed, carrying Eleanor's trunk through one of the doors. The little girl took Eleanor's hand without hesitation, her small fingers warm and trusting. "We have a pump inside," she announced proudly. "Papa put it in last winter. Mrs. Carson says it's civilized." Eleanor smiled despite her nerves. "It sounds very civilized indeed." Supper was a quiet affair, broken only by Sarah's occasional chatter about the farm animals and her doll, Matilda. Wyatt said little, though his eyes frequently moved to Eleanor's face when he thought she wasn't looking. She felt his gaze like a physical touch, assessing, wondering. She recognized his caution because it mirrored her own. After the meal, Sarah insisted on showing Eleanor her room, the second bedroom, which held a small bed draped with a colorful quilt, a trunk painted with flowers, and a shelf of treasures, pretty stones, feathers, a tiny carved horse. "Papa made this for me," Sarah said, offering the wooden horse for inspection. "He can make anything. It's beautiful, Eleanor said, noting the careful detail in the small carving. When will you marry Papa? The question was delivered with such innocent directness that Eleanor couldn't prevent a small gasp. Sarah, Wyatt's voice came from the doorway, a gentle reprimand. Remember what we discussed about Miss Bennet needing time to settle in? Sorry, Papa. But the child didn't look particularly sorry, just curious. It's time for bed, he said, glancing apologetically at Eleanor. I'll show Miss Bennet to her room while you get ready. Her room turned out to be Wyatt's room, a realization that sent fresh panic through her. He must have read it in her face because he quickly said, I'll be sleeping in the barn until after the wedding. Pastor Simmons comes through on Sunday. That suits you. Relief washed through her. Yes, that's suitable. Thank you. He nodded, handed her the lamp and turned to leave. Miss Morgan, she called after him. When he paused, she summoned her courage. I want to thank you for bringing me here and to assure you I'll do my best to be a good wife and mother to Sarah. Something flickered in his eyes. Doubt. Hope. She couldn't tell. We'll talk more tomorrow, Miss Bennet. Rest now. Alone at last, Eleanor sank onto the bed, his bed, and finally allowed her tears to fall. She wept for the familiar life she'd left behind, for her uncertain future, for the loneliness that had driven her to accept a stranger's proposal. What kind of woman traveled thousands of miles to marry a man she'd never met? A desperate one. After her aunt's death had left her penniless, with distant cousins circling to claim the house, she'd had few options. Governess, companion, factory worker, or wife. She'd chosen wife, hoping that respect might grow into affection over time. Now, faced with the reality of Wyatt Morgan's solid, reserved, watching her with those intense blue eyes, and his daughter, who looked at Eleanor with such hope, she trembled at what she'd committed to. Morning came too quickly, the unfamiliar sounds of ranch life waking Eleanor before dawn. She dressed hurriedly in one of her plain dresses, pinned her hair as neatly as she could without assistance, and steeled herself to face her new life. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found Wyatt already at the stove, cooking breakfast while Sarah set the table. Good morning, she said, embarrassed to have slept late. Wyatt looked up, and for an instant, something warm flashed across his features before his expression settled back into its usual reserve. Mrs. Carson will be here after breakfast, he said. She'll help you learn the house. I can manage, Eleanor replied, not wanting to appear helpless. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. I'm sure you can, Miss Bennet, but there's no shame in learning. Mrs. Carson arrived shortly after breakfast, a stout woman with gray-streaked hair and capable hands that never seemed to rest. She surveyed Eleanor with kind but assessing eyes. So you're the Eastern girl, she said, not unkindly. Mr. Morgan says you're to be the new Mrs. Eleanor straightened her shoulders. Yes, I am. The older woman nodded, seemingly satisfied with whatever she saw. Well then, let's get you acquainted with how things run here. It ain't Boston, that's certain. Over the next few hours, Mrs. Carson guided Eleanor through the rhythms of ranch life, how to work the temperamental stove, where the root cellar was located, which chickens were laying and which were stubborn, how to judge when bread dough had risen properly in the dry prairie air. It was overwhelming, but Eleanor was determined not to show weakness. You'll do fine, Mrs. Carson declared at midday. You've got good hands and you ain't afraid of work. That's more than half the battle out here. Eleanor flushed at the unexpected praise. Thank you. I want to. I need to make this work. Mrs. Carson's expression softened. Mr. Morgan's a good man. Lost his Elizabeth in childbirth with their second. Baby didn't make it either. Nearly broke him. Wouldn't have survived if not for little Sarah. Eleanor's heart constricted. The letters had mentioned his widowed status but offered no details. How long ago? 4 years now. Time enough for healing. Though a man like Wyatt Morgan carries his grief deep. Mrs. Carson checked the stew simmering on the stove. Sarah needs a mother, and he needs a partner. He wouldn't have sent for you if he wasn't ready. The woman's matter-of-fact assessment should have reassured Ellen, but instead it underscored the magnitude of what she'd undertaken. She wasn't just becoming a wife, she was stepping into the void left by a beloved wife and mother. Does Sarah remember her mother? Eleanor asked quietly. Not really. She was just a babe, but she knows the stories. Miss Morgan makes sure of that. Elizabeth was a fine woman, raised on a ranch herself, knew the life. Mrs. Carson gave Eleanor a sideways glance. Different from you. Eleanor swallowed hard. I'm willing to learn. That's good, because willing is what keeps folks alive out here. Mrs. Carson picked up her bonnet. I'll be back on Wednesday. You need anything before then, send Sarah over. We're just 3 miles east. After Mrs. Carson left, Eleanor stood in the kitchen, momentarily overwhelmed by silence. Sarah was napping, and Wyatt was out with the cattle. She was alone in what would soon be her home, surrounded by unfamiliar tools and tasks. In Boston, she'd helped with household duties, but nothing had prepared her for this self-sufficient existence where everything food, soap, candles had to be made by hand. Rather than succumb to panic, Eleanor rolled up her sleeves. She would start with what she knew. The floor needed sweeping, and there were dishes to wash. Simple tasks, but necessary ones. By the time Sarah awoke, Eleanor had cleaned the kitchen and was carefully examining the contents of the pantry, taking inventory. Are you hungry? Eleanor asked when the tousled-haired child appeared in the doorway. Matilda the doll clutched against her chest. Sarah nodded, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Can I have a biscuit with honey? Of course. Eleanor found the tin of biscuits Mrs. Carson had pointed out and a small jar of honey, golden in the afternoon light. Would you like milk too? The girl's face lit up. Yes. please. Papa usually forgets the milk. As Sarah settled at the table, Eleanor poured a cup of milk from the earthenware jug in the spring house. The simple domestic act felt strangely significant, her first real motherly duty. Papa says you're from a big city, Sarah said, honey dripping from her biscuit onto her fingers. Do you miss it? Eleanor considered the question carefully. I miss certain things. The libraries and music. My friend Catherine, she sat across from Sarah. But cities are very crowded, and the air is often dirty. The sky here is the bluest I've ever seen. Sarah seemed to consider this. Would you like to see my secret place? It has the best sky watching spot. I'd be honored, Eleanor said, touched by the offer. Sarah led her behind the house to a small clearing where a fallen log created a natural bench. Above them, the vast Kansas sky stretched endlessly, scattered with clouds that cast moving shadows across the prairie grass. Papa helped me make this place after Mama died, Sarah explained, settling on the log and patting the space beside her. He said, when I miss her, I can come here and look at the sky because that's where she is now. Eleanor sat carefully next to the child, her heart aching. That's a beautiful thought. Papa says Mama was beautiful and brave and that she loved me very much. Sarah tilted her head to look at Eleanor. Did your mama die too? Yes, Eleanor said softly, when I was about your age. I lived with my aunt after that. Sarah nodded with the solemn understanding of a child who knew loss. That's sad. But now you're here, so you won't be lonely anymore, and neither will we. The simple wisdom struck Eleanor deeply. Perhaps that's what they all world lonely souls seeking connection. Before she could respond, Sarah jumped up. Papa's back, she exclaimed, pointing to a figure on horseback approaching from the eastern pasture. Wyatt Morgan rode a magnificent chestnut gelding, his form relaxed in the saddle as though he'd been born to it. Eleanor watched his easy confidence with the large animal, so different from the careful restraint he showed around her. As he dismounted near the barn, Sarah ran to him, and he swept her up into a one-armed embrace, his face transforming with a smile Eleanor hadn't yet seen. Watching them, she felt simultaneously like an intruder and desperately envious of their easy affection. Her own father had been distant, formal, a man who believed children should be seen and not heard. He died when Eleanor was 12, leaving her in the care of his sister, Aunt Harriet, who'd been kind but equally reserved. Miss Bennett, Wyatt called, setting Sarah down. Everything all right with Mars? Carson's visit? Eleanor walked toward them, smoothing her skirt nervously. Yes. She was very helpful. Supper will be ready in about an hour if that suits. He nodded, something like approval in his eyes. That'll be fine. I need to see to the horse first. Can I help? Sarah asked eagerly. Not today, Pumpkin. Thunder's in a mood. Why don't you help Miss Bennett with supper instead? Sarah's face fell momentarily before she nodded. All right, Papa. As Wyatt led the horse toward the barn, Sarah took Eleanor's hand. I can show you how to make cornbread. Papa likes it with honey. The simple meal of stew and cornbread that evening was more successful than Eleanor had dared hope. Wyatt ate with appreciation, and Sarah proudly announced that she had helped make the cornbread just the way Papa likes it. It's very good, Wyatt said, glancing at Eleanor. You're settling in, then? I'm trying, she admitted. Everything is very different here. He studied her for a moment. Different isn't always bad. No, she agreed softly. It isn't. After Sarah was tucked into bed, Wyatt invited Eleanor to sit on the porch. The evening air had cooled and stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Eleanor wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and perched on the wooden bench, acutely aware of Wyatt sitting beside her, his presence both reassuring and unnerving. Mrs. Carson speaks highly of you, he said finally. Eleanor's eyebrows rose in surprise. She barely knows me. She's a good judge of character. Has to be. Out here. Single quotes, he gazed toward the horizon. I should tell you more about what to expect as my wife. The word hung between them, laden with unspoken expectation. Eleanor's hands twisted in her lap. Yes, I'd like to know. This life is hard, he said bluntly. The winters are brutal. Sometimes we're snowed in for weeks. Summer brings drought and sometimes tornadoes. There's always work and it's never done. I understand, she said, though she wasn't sure she did. Not really. His eyes, shadowed in the fading light, turned to her. You had other options in Boston. Why come here to marry a stranger? Eleanor took a deep breath, gathering her courage. She owed him honesty at least. My aunt died last winter, she began. She was my only family. The house went to my cousin Edward, who made it clear I was an inconvenience. I could have become a governess or a shop girl, but those positions are precarious for a woman alone. She met his gaze directly. Your letters were straightforward. You needed a wife and mother for Sarah. I needed a home and purpose. It seemed ... sensible. Wyatt's expression remained unreadable. Sensible, he repeated. Not exactly what most women dream of in a marriage. Eleanor's chin lifted. Dreams are luxuries, Mr. Morgan. Security is a necessity. Something shifted in his respect, perhaps. You're practical. That'll serve you well here. He paused. But there are things you should know before Sunday, about what I expect and what you can expect from me. Eleanor's pulse quickened, but she kept her voice steady. Please, tell me. I'll provide for you and protect you. This ranch, everything I have, will be shared with you. I won't ever raise a hand to you in anger, and I won't tolerate anyone else doing so either. His voice was matter-of-fact, as if reciting terms of a contract. In return, I expect loyalty, honesty, and help with the ranch and Sarah. He hesitated, and Eleanor sensed they were approaching the subject they'd both been circling. As for other aspects of marriage, he continued, his voice lower, I won't force anything on you, but I do want more children. Time. If that's not something you're willing to consider, you should tell me now. Heat flooded Eleanor's face, but she forced herself to maintain eye contact. I understand a husband's rights, Mr. Morgan, and I would like children too someday. He nodded once, seemingly satisfied with her answer. Good, and you should call me Wyatt. If we're to be married in 3 days' time, formalities seem unnecessary. Wyatt, she repeated softly, testing the name on her tongue. It felt intimate, this small act of familiarity. They sat in silence for a moment, the vastness of the prairie night surrounding them. Crickets chirped, and somewhere in the distance a coyote called. It's beautiful here, Eleanor said finally. Different, but beautiful. Grows on you, Wyatt agreed. Elizabeth felt the same when she first arrived. She was from Nebraska, not as far east as you, but still. It took time for her to adjust. Eleanor tensed slightly at the mention of his first wife, uncertain how to respond. Sarah doesn't remember her, Wyatt continued, his voice gentle. But I want her to know about her mother. I hope that doesn't trouble you. Of course not, Eleanor said quickly. She should know about her mother. I would never want to replace those memories. Wyatt's shoulders relaxed slightly. Thank you for that. He stood, signaling the end of their conversation. It's getting late and tomorrow will come early. Sleep well, Miss Bennet. Eleanor, she corrected softly. If I'm to call you Wyatt, then ... A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Eleanor, then. Good night. As she lay in bed that night, Eleanor replayed their conversation. Wyatt Morgan was not what she had expected. There was a gentleness beneath his reserve, a decency in his straightforward manner. Perhaps in time they might build something real from this arrangement of convenience. It wasn't the romantic love she'd once dreamed of as a girl, but it was honest. That at least was something to hold on to. The next 2 days passed in a blur of activity. Eleanor threw herself into learning the rhythms of ranch life, determined to prove her worth. She rose before dawn to help with breakfast, learned to gather eggs without antagonizing the protective hens, and spent hours with Mrs. Carson, who returned as promised to teach her more kitchen skills. You're a quick study, Mrs. Carson noted approvingly, as Eleanor successfully managed her first batch of bread. Most city girls take months to get the feel of it. I want it to be useful, Eleanor replied simply. Sarah became her constant shadow, eager to show Eleanor everything about the ranch. The child's enthusiastic acceptance was a balm to Eleanor's anxious heart. If Sarah could welcome her so readily, perhaps she truly could find a place here. Wyatt remained reserved but courteous, answering her questions patiently and occasionally offering small insights into ranch operations. She noticed how his eyes followed her when he thought she wasn't looking, his expression thoughtful rather than lustful. It gave her hope that he too was trying to envision their future together. On Saturday evening, Mrs. Carson arrived with her husband to help prepare for the wedding. She brought a dress for Eleanor, a simple blue cotton frock with lace at the collar. It was my daughter's, she explained. She's out in California now. Thought you might like something special for tomorrow, even if it's just a small ceremony. Touched by the gesture, Eleanor thanked her profusely. Later, trying on the dress in the privacy of the bedroom, she was surprised by how well it suited her. The blue brought out the gray in her eyes, and the cut, while modest, was more flattering than her usual attire. A soft knock at the door startled her. Miss Eleanor? Sarah's voice called, "Can I come in?" "Of course," Eleanor replied, smoothing the dress nervously. Sarah slipped inside, her eyes widening at the sight of Eleanor. "You look like a princess," she breathed. "Papa's gonna think you're the prettiest lady ever." Eleanor smiled, kneeling to meet the child at eye level. "Thank you, Sarah, that's very kind." Sarah fidgeted with her doll, suddenly hesitant. "After tomorrow, will you be my mama?" The question, so innocent yet so weighty, caught Eleanor unprepared. "Well, I'll be married to your father, which makes me your stepmother. But can I call you mama?" Sarah persisted, her blue eyes earnest. "I don't remember my real mama, and Papa says it's important to have one." Eleanor's throat tightened with emotion. "If that's what you want, and if your father agrees, I would be honored. But Sarah, I want you to know something." She took the child's small hands in hers. "I'll never try to replace your mother in your heart. There's room to love both of us in different ways." Sarah considered this solemnly before nodding. "I think Mama in heaven wouldn't mind sharing. She'd want Papa and me to be happy." "I think so too," Eleanor whispered, blinking back unexpected tears. Later that night, unable to sleep, Eleanor stepped outside for a breath of fresh air. The moon cast silver light across the prairie, turning the landscape ethereal. She wrapped her shawl tighter against the cool night breeze, her thoughts tumultuous. Tomorrow she would become Mrs. Wyatt Morgan, wife and mother, mistress of this ranch. The weight of those responsibilities pressed upon her, mingled with an unexpected flutter of anticipation. Not just anxiety, but something gentler, hope perhaps. "Couldn't sleep," Wyatt's voice came from the shadows of the porch. Eleanor startled, then relaxed as he stepped into the moonlight. "No, too many thoughts." Having second thoughts? His tone was careful, neutral. "No," she answered truthfully. "Just ... reflecting on how much has changed in such a short time. A week ago, I was on a stagecoach heading west, terrified of what awaited me. And now?" he asked quietly. Eleanor looked up at him, this man who would be her husband in mere hours. "Now I'm still nervous, but not terrified. I think we might do well together, Wyatt Morgan." Something warmed in his eyes. I think so too, Eleanor Bennett. He hesitated, then added, Sarah asked me if she could call you Mama after we're married. She asked me the same, Eleanor admitted. I told her it would be your decision. What do you think about it? Eleanor considered carefully. I think she needs a mother's love, and I'm prepared to give it. But I don't want to erase Elizabeth's memory. Wyatt's expression softened. You couldn't. Elizabeth is part of who Sarah is, part of this family. But that doesn't mean there isn't room for you too. He looked out at the moonlit prairie. I've learned that hearts expand to hold what they need to hold. Grief and joy can exist side by side. His words, the most personal he'd shared with her, touched Eleanor deeply. Then I would be honored to be her mama if you approve. I do, he said simply. Then with a slight smile, better get some rest. Pastor Simmons arrives early and Mrs. Carson will have both our hides if we're not ready. Eleanor nodded, suddenly shy. Good night then. As she turned to go inside, Wyatt spoke again. Eleanor, thank you for coming here, for giving us a chance. She paused, looking back at him. Thank you for asking me to come. In the soft moonlight, something unspoken passed between them. Not love, not yet, but understanding. Perhaps Eleanor thought as she returned to her bed, that was the best foundation for a marriage after all. Dawn broke clear and golden on Eleanor's wedding day. She woke to the sound of activity in the kitchen. Mrs. Carson had arrived early, as promised, bringing with her the makings for a small celebration. Can't have a wedding without cake, the older woman declared when Eleanor emerged from the bedroom, even if it's just a simple one. Sarah danced around the kitchen in excitement, her hair freshly brushed and tied with a ribbon. Pastor Simmons is coming. Papa's already shaved and everything. Eleanor smiled at the child's enthusiasm. Then I'd better get ready too, hadn't I? With Mrs. Carson's help, Eleanor dressed in the blue frock, pinning her hair in a simple but elegant style. She had no veil, no orange blossoms, none of the traditional trappings of a Boston bride. Yet standing before the small mirror, she felt a quiet dignity in her appearance. This was not the wedding she had imagined as a girl, but it was honest, real. You look lovely, Mrs. Carson said approvingly. Simple and true, like a prairie wife should be. From her valise, Eleanor withdrew her mother's locket, a small silver oval containing a tiny portrait. It was her only jewelry, her only connection to the mother she barely remembered. She fastened it around her neck, touching it briefly for courage. Pastor Simmons arrived mid-morning, a jovial man with a weathered face and kind eyes. He greeted Eleanor warmly. So you're the brave Eastern lady who's taken on our Wyatt and little Sarah. God bless you for it. The ceremony took place in the main room of the ranch house. Mrs. Carson and her husband stood as witnesses, while Sarah watched wide-eyed from a chair decorated with wildflowers. Wyatt, dressed in clean trousers and his best shirt, waited by the fireplace, his expression solemn but his eyes gentle when they met Eleanor's. Pastor Simmons kept the service brief and straightforward, speaking of duty, partnership, and God's blessing on their union. When the time came to exchange vows, Eleanor was surprised by the steadiness of her own voice as she promised to love, honor, and obey. Wyatt's deep voice resonated through the small room as he made his own pledges. The ring, if you please, Pastor Simmons prompted. Eleanor hadn't expected a ring. In his letters, Wyatt had mentioned nothing about such a luxury, yet he reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple gold band. It was my mother's, he explained quietly as he slipped it onto her finger. I want you to have it. The unexpected gesture touched Eleanor deeply. This small circle of gold represented not just their union, but a connection to Wyatt's family, his past. It was a gift of trust as much as tradition. By the authority vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife, Pastor Simmons declared. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder. There was a moment of awkward silence before the pastor added with a smile, you may kiss your bride, Wyatt. Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks as Wyatt stepped closer. His hands, work-roughened but gentle, cupped her face, and his lips touched hers in a kiss that was brief but tender. It was her first kiss, an acknowledgement of their new bond rather than a passionate embrace, yet Eleanor felt it resonate through her like ripples on still water. Hurrah! Sarah cheered, breaking the solemnity of the moment. Now you're really my mama. Laughter filled the room, dispelling the tension. Mrs. Carson produced the promised cake, and Mr. Carson offered a toast with his homemade cider. For a few hours, the small ranch house felt warm with celebration and goodwill. Pastor Simmons departed after the meal, offering final blessings and promising to visit again in a month's time. The Carsons stayed to help clean up, then tactfully took their leave as afternoon shadows lengthened. We'll take Sarah for the night, Mrs. Carson whispered to Eleanor as they prepared to depart. Give you two some privacy to start things proper. Eleanor's nervousness must have shown on her face because the older woman squeezed her hand reassuringly. He's a gentleman, Wyatt Morgan. Just be honest with him, and all will be well. Sarah was reluctant to leave until Wyatt promised she could help Eleanor bake bread the next day. And we'll be a real family when you come home, Eleanor added, hugging the child close. As the Carsons' wagon disappeared down the road with a waving Sarah, Eleanor and Wyatt found themselves truly alone for the first time. The silence between them hummed with unspoken thoughts. Would you like to see the rest of the ranch? Wyatt asked suddenly. We haven't had time for a proper tour. Grateful for the distraction, Eleanor agreed. He showed her the barn with its stalls for the horses and the milk cow, the chicken coop he'd recently expanded, the vegetable garden struggling against the Kansas sun, and the small orchard of apple trees he'd planted 3 years ago. They're just starting to bear fruit, he explained, his voice warming with pride. "By next fall we should have enough for pies and preserves." "It's wonderful," Eleanor said sincerely. "You've built something remarkable here." Wyatt looked at her, surprise evident in his expression. "Most women wouldn't see it that way. It's a hard life, far from town and comforts. It's a good life," she countered. "Honest work, fresh air, land of your own. Many in Boston would envy that." As the sun began to set, they returned to the house. Wyatt built a fire against the evening chill while Eleanor prepared a simple supper from the wedding leftovers. They ate together at the table, no longer as strangers but as husband and wife, though the newness of it still hung between them. After the dishes were washed and put away, Wyatt cleared his throat. "I'll give you some time to get ready for bed." Eleanor nodded, unable to meet his eyes. She retreated to the bedroom, their bedroom now, and changed into her nightgown with trembling fingers. Her aunt had explained the basics of what would be expected of her as a wife, but the clinical description had done little to prepare her for the reality of this moment. When Wyatt entered the bedroom, he carried a lamp that cast soft golden light across the room. He'd removed his boots and shirt, but still wore his trousers. Eleanor sat perched on the edge of the bed, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "We don't have to do anything tonight," he said quietly, setting the lamp on the bedside table. "If you're not ready." Eleanor looked up, surprised by his consideration. "I know what's expected in a marriage. Expectations aren't always right." He sat beside her, careful to leave space between them. "I meant what I said yesterday. I won't force anything on you, Eleanor. This isn't just about ... It's about building a life together. We have time." Relief and gratitude washed through her. "Thank you," she whispered. He reached out slowly and took her hand, his thumb brushing over the gold band he'd placed there hours earlier. "I want this to work for all of us. Sarah needs stability, needs a mother's love. And I ... single quotes. He hesitated. "I've been alone a long time." "I've been alone too," Eleanor admitted softly. They sat together in the lamplight, hands joined, the silence between them no longer awkward but companionable. Eventually they lay down together, Wyatt keeping to his side of the bed as promised. Eleanor fell asleep to the sound of his steady breathing, feeling strangely safe in the presence of this man who was now her husband. She woke before dawn to find Wyatt already gone, the imprint of his body still warm beside her. For a moment she lay still, processing the reality of her new life. Mrs. Wyatt Morgan, ranch wife. The title still felt foreign but less frightening than it had just days before. Rising, she dressed quickly in her work dress and apron. There would be chores waiting, and Sarah would return soon, eager for the promised bread-making lesson. As she pinned her hair, Eleanor caught her reflection in the small mirror. She looked different somehow, less guarded, more purposeful. "Eleanor?" Wyatt's voice called from the kitchen. "Coffee's ready if you want some." "Coming," she replied, surprised by the simple domesticity of the moment. In the kitchen, Wyatt handed her a steaming cup. Their fingers brushed in the exchange, a small contact that sent warmth through her that had nothing to do with the coffee. "Sleep well?" he asked, his eyes searching her face. "Yes, thank you." She sipped the strong brew, appreciating its warmth. "And you?" He nodded, a small smile touching his lips. "Better than I have in a long time." The Carsons returned Sarah mid-morning, the little girl bursting through the door with the energy of a whirlwind. She flung herself at Eleanor with such enthusiasm that Eleanor nearly lost her balance. "Mama," Sarah exclaimed, the word falling naturally from her lips. "I'm home." Eleanor's heart swelled at the simple declaration. Home, such a powerful word. She knelt to embrace the child properly. "Did you have a nice time with Mrs. Carson?" "She let me help feed the baby chicks," Sarah reported eagerly. "But I missed you and Papa. Did you miss me?" "Every minute," Eleanor assured her, smoothing the child's blonde hair. "The house was much too quiet without you." Mrs. Carson watched the exchange with approval. "Looks like things are settling in nicely," she observed to Wyatt, who stood nearby. The good Lord knew what he was doing, bringing her to you. After the Carsons departed, Sarah insisted on her promised bread-making lesson. Eleanor tied an apron around the child's waist. It wrapped around her tiny frame twice and positioned a wooden crate for her to stand on beside the table. "First, we measure the flour," Eleanor explained, guiding Sarah's small hands as they scooped the white powder. Wyatt watched from the doorway for a moment, a softness in his expression that Eleanor hadn't seen before. Their eyes met over Sarah's head, and something unspoken passed between them, a shared tenderness for this child who had so easily accepted their new arrangement. The days that followed established a rhythm to their life together. Eleanor rose early with Wyatt, preparing breakfast before he headed out to work the ranch. Sarah helped with simple chores, chattering constantly, filling the house with life and laughter. In the afternoons, while Sarah napped, Eleanor tackled the endless tasks of a ranch wife, mending, preserving, cleaning, preparing. At night, Wyatt continued to respect her space, keeping to his side of the bed. But Eleanor found herself increasingly aware of his presence, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the warmth that radiated from his body, the way his face relaxed in sleep, losing some of its customary reserve. A week after the wedding, a fierce thunderstorm swept across the prairie. The rain pounded against the roof like angry fists, and lightning split the sky in jagged bursts. Sarah, terrified by the thunder, crept into their bedroom and burrowed between them. "It's all right, Pumpkin," Wyatt murmured, his arm protective around his daughter. "The angels are just moving their furniture," Eleanor added, repeating what her own mother had once told her about thunderstorms. Sarah's eyes widened. "Really? That's what my mother told me." Eleanor said, smoothing the child's hair. And whenever I was scared, she would sing to me until I fell asleep. Will you sing to me? Sarah asked, her small voice hopeful. Aware of Wyatt's gaze upon her, Eleanor began to sing softly, a lullaby her mother had sung, one of the few memories she had of her. Her voice wasn't remarkable, but it was sweet and clear, rising above the storm's fury. As Sarah's eyelids grew heavy, Wyatt's hand found Eleanor's across the child's sleeping form, his fingers intertwined with hers, warm and strong, and he held on even after Sarah had drifted to sleep. In the morning, Eleanor woke to find both Sarah and Wyatt gone from the bed. Voices drew her to the kitchen, where she found them preparing breakfast together, Wyatt frying bacon while Sarah carefully set the table. "Mama!" Sarah called when she spotted Eleanor. "Papa's letting me help with breakfast so you can sleep more." That was very thoughtful, Eleanor said, catching Wyatt's eye. He shrugged, but she didn't miss the slight flush on his cheeks. "You looked peaceful. Didn't want to wake." It was a small gesture, but it touched her deeply. This consideration from a man who had every right to expect her to rise before him and attend to household duties. After breakfast, Wyatt surprised her again. "I need to check the north pasture fence. Thought you and Sarah might want to come along. Make a day of it." Eleanor hesitated. "I have washing to do and bread to start. It'll keep till tomorrow," he interrupted gently. "You've been working non-stop since you arrived. The ranch won't fall apart if you take one day." Sarah bounced with excitement. "Please, Mama. Papa knows where the best wildflowers grow." Unable to resist their combined persuasion, Eleanor agreed. Wyatt packed a simple lunch while she and Sarah readied themselves for the outing. Within the hour, they were heading north, Wyatt on horseback and Eleanor and Sarah in the small wagon. The prairie stretched before them, vast and vibrant with early summer growth. Wildflowers dotted the grassland in splashes of purple, yellow, and white. In the distance, a small herd of deer grazed, lifting their heads curiously as the wagon approached before bounding away in graceful arcs. "It's beautiful," Eleanor breathed, taking in the sweeping vista. "Different kind of beauty than Boston, I expect," Wyatt commented. "Yes," she agreed. "Boston has its charms. The architecture, the gardens, but this ... she gestured to the endless horizon. "This makes you feel both insignificant and infinite at the same time." Wyatt looked at her with surprise and something like appreciation. "That's exactly it. Never heard it put quite that way." They stopped near a small creek where cottonwood trees provided shade. While Wyatt checked the nearby fence line, Eleanor and Sarah spread a blanket and unpacked their lunch. The simple meal of bread, cheese, and dried apples tasted extraordinary in the open air. After they ate, Sarah wandered along the creek's edge, collecting pretty stones and wildflowers under Eleanor's watchful eye. Wyatt returned, settling beside Eleanor on the blanket. "Fence needs some work," he reported, "but nothing urgent." Eleanor suspected he'd known that before they left, that the fence had been an excuse for this outing. The thought warmed her. Thank you for suggesting this," she said. "It's good to see beyond the yard." He nodded, stretching his long legs out before him. "Used to bring Elizabeth here sometimes." He paused, glancing at her cautiously. "Does it bother you when I mention her?" Eleanor considered carefully. "No," she answered honestly. "She was an important part of your life, of Sarah's life. I wouldn't want you to pretend she never existed." Relief flickered across his features. "Some women might feel they're living in a shadow." "I'm not replacing her," Eleanor said softly, building something new alongside her memory. Wyatt's eyes held hers, something warm and appreciative in their blue depths. Slowly, he reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her face, his fingers lingering against her cheek. Eleanor's breath caught at the tender gesture. "Papa, Mama, look what I found." Sarah's excited call broke the moment as she raced toward them, hands cupped around some discovery. It was a tiny nest that had fallen from a tree, perfect in its construction, empty of eggs or birds. Sarah's face glowed with the importance of her find. "Can we take it home?" she asked eagerly. "I think that's a fine idea," Wyatt said. "Your mama can help you find the perfect place to display it." The simple, domestic scene, a father, mother and child enjoying a summer day together, felt so natural that Eleanor was momentarily overwhelmed. Just weeks ago, she had been alone in the world, facing an uncertain future. Now she had a husband, a child who called her mama, and a place where she belonged. That night after Sarah was asleep, Eleanor and Wyatt sat together on the porch, watching as stars appeared in the darkening sky. The silence between them was comfortable now, no longer filled with awkwardness or uncertainty. "I never thanked you properly," Wyatt said suddenly. Eleanor looked at him questioningly. "For what? For coming here? For taking on Sarah? For ... single quotes," he gestured vaguely. "All of it. You've exceeded every expectation I had when I wrote those letters. I should be thanking you," she countered. "You've given me a home, a family." He turned to face her, his expression earnest in the fading light. "I want you to be happy here, Eleanor. Not just content or resigned, but truly happy." The sincerity in his voice touched her deeply. "I think I could be," she admitted softly. "I already feel more at home here than I ever did in Boston." Wyatt's hand found hers, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "When I lost Elizabeth, I thought that was the end of any chance at happiness. I focused on survival, on raising Sarah, on keeping the ranch going. I didn't expect ... single quotes." He paused, searching for words. "I didn't expect to find someone who could bring light back into our home." Eleanor's heart quickened at his words, at the gentle pressure of his hand on hers. "Wyatt," she whispered, not knowing what else to say. He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, but Eleanor remained still, her eyes closing as his lips met hers. Unlike their brief wedding kiss, this one lingered, deepened. His hand cradled her face and hers found the solid warmth of his chest. When they finally parted, both were breathing faster. "I should check on the horses," Wyatt said, his voice husky. Eleanor nodded, unable to form words. As he walked toward the barn, she touched her lips, still feeling the pressure of his kiss. For the first time since arriving, she allowed herself to acknowledge the truth. She was falling in love with her husband. The weeks that followed brought subtle changes to the Morgan household. Eleanor's tentative steps as wife and mother grew more confident. The kitchen, once an intimidating domain of unfamiliar tools and techniques, became her realm. Her bread rose higher each time, her stews more flavorful. The garden flourished under her careful tending, and the pantry shelves gradually filled with jars of preserved vegetables and fruits preparation for the winter months. Mrs. Carson had warned would come all too soon. Sarah blossomed under Eleanor's attention. The child had always been cheerful, but now she radiated contentment. Each morning she helped Eleanor gather eggs, her small hand trustingly clasped in her new mother's. In the afternoons, Eleanor taught her simple letters and numbers, determined that Sarah would have more education than most prairie children. "My aunt insisted I learn," Eleanor explained to Wyatt when he found them practicing writing in the flowers spread on the kitchen table. "Knowledge is a gift no one can take from you." Wyatt watched them from the doorway, his expression thoughtful. "My schooling ended when I was 12, he admitted. Always regretted that single quotes from that day forward. He joined their lessons when ranch work allowed, his large hands awkwardly forming letters alongside Sarah's childish scrawl. The sight of this strong man humbly learning alongside his daughter filled Eleanor with tenderness. Between Wyatt and Eleanor, something delicate was taking root. The initial kiss on the porch had not been repeated. Wyatt seemed determined to give her time, to let her set the pace of their growing intimacy. But there were moments, his hand lingering on her shoulder as she cooked, her fingers brushing his as she handed him coffee, their eyes meeting in shared amusement at Sarah's antics. At night, the space between them in bed gradually diminished. Eleanor no longer lay rigidly on her side, fearful of accidental contact. Instead, she found herself drawn to his warmth, sometimes waking to find her head pillowed on his shoulder or his arm draped protectively across her waist. One evening, as summer edged toward autumn, a wagon appeared on the horizon. Eleanor was hanging laundry when she spotted it, the distant shape growing clearer as it approached. She shaded her eyes against the setting sun, unease prickling along her spine. Visitors were rare at Morgan Ranch, especially unannounced ones. "Wyatt?" she called toward the barn where he was repairing a harness. He emerged, following her gaze to the approaching wagon. His posture stiffened. "Take Sarah inside," he said quietly. "Who is it?" Eleanor asked, already gathering the laundry basket. "Don't know yet, just a precaution." But she didn't miss the way his hand moved to his hip where his pistol would normally be holstered. Sarah was playing with her doll on the porch. Eleanor ushered her inside, trying to keep her voice light. "Let's see about those cookies we made earlier, shall we?" From the window, she watched as Wyatt walked toward the gate, his stance casual but alert. The wagon pulled up, driven by a man Eleanor didn't recognize, middle-aged, well-dressed in city clothes that looked out of place on the prairie. Beside him sat a woman in a fashionable traveling outfit, her face obscured by a wide-brimmed hat. Eleanor's chest tightened as she saw Wyatt's step falter. Even from a distance, she could read the shock in his posture. "Who is it, Mama?" Sarah asked, pressing her face to the window beside Eleanor. "I'm not sure, sweetheart. Let's wait and see." The woman descended from the wagon, moving toward Wyatt with confident steps. She reached up to remove her hat, revealing golden hair arranged in an elaborate style. Even at this distance, Eleanor could see she was beautiful. Wyatt stood frozen, his body language a mixture of disbelief and wariness. The woman said something, gesturing emphatically. Then, to Eleanor's horror, she stepped forward and placed her hand on Wyatt's chest in a gesture of unmistakable familiarity. Sarah gasped beside her. "That's my mama," she exclaimed, her voice a mixture of confusion and excitement. "Papa said she went to heaven, but she came back." Eleanor's blood ran cold. It wasn't possible. Elizabeth Morgan was dead. Wyatt had buried her, grieved her, yet the child's instinctive recognition couldn't be dismissed. "Stay here, Sarah," Eleanor said firmly, her voice steadier than she felt. "I need to speak with your father." Heart pounding, she stepped outside. The sound of the door closing drew the attention of both Wyatt and the strange woman. Wyatt's face was pale, his expression stricken. The woman looked at Eleanor with open curiosity. "Eleanor," Wyatt called, his voice strained. "Come here, please." On legs that felt like water, Eleanor crossed the yard. Up close, she could see that the woman was indeed beautiful, with delicate features and eyes the same striking blue as Sarah's. She regarded Eleanor with a mixture of surprise and calculation. "Eleanor, this is Rebecca Thorne," Wyatt said carefully. "Elizabeth's sister." Relief washed through Eleanor so intensely she nearly swayed. "Not Elizabeth, a sister, Mrs. Morgan," Rebecca acknowledged, her voice cultured, her gaze assessing. "I must say, you're not what I expected when I heard my brother-in-law had remarried." There was something in her tone, a subtle bar beneath the polite words, that put Eleanor immediately on guard. "Miss Thorne," Eleanor replied evenly. "We weren't expecting visitors." Clearly, Rebecca's smile didn't reach her eyes. "I've been in Europe these past 5 years. I only recently returned to discover my sister had died and her husband had replaced her with ... She gestured vaguely at Eleanor. A mail-order bride. The words were designed to wound, to diminish. Eleanor felt her cheeks heat but kept her chin high. Wyatt's jaw tightened. Eleanor is my wife, he said firmly. And Sarah's mother now, is she? Rebecca's eyebrow arched delicately. How convenient. Where is my niece? I'm eager to see how she's grown. Inside, Eleanor answered, finding her voice. She saw you from the window. She thought you were her mother. Something flickered in Rebecca's expression, satisfaction perhaps, or triumph. Well, I'm the closest thing to her mother she has left. The resemblance between Elizabeth and me was always remarkable. The man from the wagon approached, clearing his throat. Should I unload our trunks, Miss Thorne? Trunks? Wyatt echoed, frowning. How long are you planning to stay? Rebecca waved a gloved hand airily. Oh, just until I'm satisfied that Sarah is being properly cared for. A week, perhaps two. Mr. Jenkins here is my solicitor. He'll be returning for me once his business in Council Bluffs is concluded. Rebecca, Wyatt began, but was interrupted by the sound of running feet. Mama! Sarah's voice rang out as she burst from the house, ignoring Eleanor's earlier instruction. She stopped short at the sight of Rebecca, her small face a picture of confusion. Up close, the child could now see the differences between this woman and the mother she only knew from descriptions and a faded daguerreotype. You're not my mama, she said, disappointment evident in her voice. Rebecca knelt, her silk traveling dress pooling around her. No, darling. I'm your Aunt Rebecca, your mother's sister. Don't you remember me? I visited when you were very small. Sarah shook her head slowly, then looked back at Eleanor with uncertainty. My mom is there, she said, pointing to Eleanor. Rebecca's expression hardened momentarily before smoothing into a smile. Of course she is, dear, but I'm your family too. Your real family. And I've come such a long way to see you. The emphasis on real was subtle but unmistakable. Eleanor felt as though the ground beneath her feet had suddenly shifted. This elegant, sophisticated woman was blood-kin to Sarah, a connection Eleanor could never claim, and from the calculating look in Rebecca's eyes, she intended to use that fact to her advantage. We should go inside, Wyatt said, breaking the tense silence. It'll be dark soon and the temperature drops quickly. As they walked toward the house, Rebecca linked her arm through Wyatt's with casual possessiveness. You must tell me everything that's happened while I've been away, dear brother-in-law. I have so much catching up to do. Eleanor followed behind, Sarah's small hand clutched in hers, a sense of foreboding settling over her like an autumn frost. The home that had finally begun to feel like hers now seemed suddenly precarious. Threatened by this unexpected visitor with her city manners and blood connection to the family, Eleanor had only just joined. That night, after an uncomfortable supper during which Rebecca reminisced about Elizabeth and questioned Eleanor's background with thinly veiled condescension, Eleanor stood at the bedroom window, watching the moonlight spill across the prairie. Wyatt entered quietly, closing the door behind him. I'm sorry, he said simply. I had no idea she was coming. Eleanor turned to face her husband, noting the weariness in his expression. You don't owe me an apology, Wyatt. She's Sarah's aunt. She has every right to visit. Not without warning, he countered, running a hand through his hair in frustration, and not to stay for weeks. This is our home. The possessive plural warmed Eleanor despite her unease. What does she want, truly? Wyatt sighed, sitting heavily on the edge of the bed. I'm not entirely sure. Rebecca and Elizabeth were close as children, but they grew apart. Rebecca wanted city life, society. Elizabeth chose the prairie, chose me. His eyes met Eleanor's. Rebecca never approved, thought Elizabeth was wasting her potential. And now I think she feels guilty. She wasn't here when Elizabeth died, didn't even come for the funeral. She was in Europe and claimed she didn't receive word in time. Bitterness tinged his voice. Suddenly she's concerned about Sarah's welfare. Eleanor sat beside him, her hand finding his. Perhaps that's all it is, concern for her niece. Wyatt's fingers tightened around hers. I don't trust her motives. Never have. And I don't like the way she looks at you. Like you're somehow less worthy because you weren't born to privilege. I can handle Rebecca Thorne, Eleanor assured him with more confidence than she felt. For Sarah's sake, we should try to make her visit pleasant. Wyatt brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm that sent warmth coursing through her. You're a better person than I am, Eleanor. The name, still new enough to surprise her, settled around her like a protective cloak. She was Eleanor Morgan now, wife and mother, not just a mail-order bride. Whatever Rebecca's intentions, that truth remained. The next morning, Eleanor rose early as usual to start breakfast. She was surprised to find Rebecca already in the kitchen, dressed impeccably despite the early hour, attempting to light the stove. Good morning, Eleanor said, hiding her surprise. Can I help you with that? Becca straightened, a faint flush on her cheeks. This wretched thing won't cooperate. In Boston, we have modern cooking stoves with proper temperature control. It takes some getting used to, Eleanor acknowledged, stepping forward to adjust the damper. I struggled with it myself when I first arrived. Rebecca watched her work with narrowed eyes. Yes, Wyatt mentioned you're from Boston as well. What part? Beacon Hill. After my parents died, I lived with my aunt near the Common. Beacon Hill? Rebecca's tone was skeptical. That's quite the prestigious address. Eleanor focused on stoking the fire. My father was a professor at Harvard. When he and my mother died of influenza, their savings went to my care and education. By the time my aunt passed, there was nothing left, so you came west to find a husband with property. The statement was laced with judgment. Eleanor met her gaze directly. I came west to find a new beginning. Meeting Wyatt and Sarah was the greatest blessing I could have hoped for. Something flashed in Rebecca's eyes. Calculation, perhaps, or reevaluation. Before she could respond, Sarah burst into the kitchen, her hair still mussed from sleep. Mama, can we make cinnamon rolls today? You promised. She stopped short at the sight of Rebecca. Oh, good morning, Aunt Rebecca. Good morning, precious, Rebecca cooed, her entire demeanor transforming. I was just about to suggest that I could make you my special pancakes, your mother's favorite when we were girls. Sarah looked uncertainly between the two women, but Mama promised. Cinnamon rolls, ... I'm sure your ... stepmother ... won't mind if we change plans, Rebecca said smoothly. After all, don't you want to try something your real mother loved? Eleanor felt the words like a physical blow, but kept her expression neutral for Sarah's sake. Actually, we have all the ingredients ready for cinnamon rolls. Perhaps you could make your special pancakes tomorrow, Miss Thorne. Rebecca, please, the other woman insisted, her smile not reaching her eyes. We're family, after all, of a sort. The day unfolded in a series of similar small skirmishes. Rebecca questioned Eleanor's methods of managing the household, suggested improvements to her cooking, and reminisced constantly about Elizabeth's superior talents. She also monopolized Sarah's attention, producing small gifts from her trunk of porcelain doll that made Sarah's beloved Matilda look shabby by comparison. Hair ribbons and fine silk, and candy and fancy wrappers. Elizabeth always had excellent taste, Rebecca commented as Sarah admired the doll. Sarah clearly inherited her refinement. Blood will tell, they say. Wyatt, who had entered in time to hear this remark, frowned deeply. Sarah, why don't you go show Matilda and your new doll the chicken? They might enjoy the fresh air. When the child had skipped outside, he turned to his sister-in-law. That's enough, Rebecca. I won't have you undermining Eleanor in her own home. Rebecca's expression turned injured. I'm merely reminiscing about my dear sister and spending time with my only niece. Surely that's not objectionable. You know exactly what you're doing, Wyatt said flatly. And it stops now. Eleanor laid a restraining hand on his arm. It's all right, Wyatt. Rebecca's naturally concerned about Sarah's welfare. Anyone would be. Rebecca studied her with new interest. How generous of you to understand, Eleanor. Perhaps I've misjudged you, but the calculating look remained in her eyes. That evening, as Eleanor tucked Sarah into bed, the child seemed troubled. Mama, she asked hesitantly, is Aunt Rebecca angry with you? Eleanor smoothed the blanket carefully. Why do you ask that, sweetheart? She makes her voice all funny when she talks to you, and she keeps telling me stories about my first mama like she wants me to forget you. Out of the mouths of babes, Eleanor thought. Your Aunt Rebecca loved your mother very much, and she misses her. It's hard for her to see someone else in her sister's place. Sarah's brow furrowed. But you're not in her place. You're in your place. My first mama is in heaven, and you're here. Both are my mamas. The simple wisdom brought tears to Eleanor's eyes. That's exactly right, darling. Will you still be my mama after Aunt Rebecca leaves? She said she might take me to Boston to visit. Alarm flared in Eleanor's chest, but she kept her voice calm. Of course I'll still be your mama. Forever and always. Boston is very far away, and you're too young for such a long journey without your father and me. Sarah seemed satisfied with this answer and soon drifted to sleep. Eleanor slipped from the room to find Wyatt waiting in the hallway, his expression grim. She wants to take Sarah to Boston? He asked in a low voice. Apparently she's mentioned it to Sarah, not to us. Wyatt's jaw tightened. She has no right. No, she doesn't, Eleanor agreed. But she's planting seeds of doubt and confusion. Sarah is resilient, but she's still a child. They retreated to the porch, where they could speak privately. The night was cool, autumn definitely approaching in the crisp edge to the air. Eleanor wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders. I think Rebecca blames herself for not being here when Elizabeth died, she said after a moment. This sudden interest in Sarah may be her way of making amends. At our expense? Wyatt shook his head. No, I won't let her disrupt what we've built here. What have we built, Wyatt? Eleanor asked softly. He turned to her, his expression softening. A family, a real one. Not based on blood or obligation, but on choice and love. The word hung between them, new and vulnerable. Eleanor's heart quickened. Love? Wyatt took her hands in his eyes sincere in the fading light. I didn't expect it. Didn't think I could feel this way again. But yes, Eleanor, I've fallen in love with you. Your strength, your kindness, the way you love Sarah as your own. I do love her, Eleanor whispered. And I love you too. I think I have almost from the beginning. He drew her close, his arms encircling her with gentle strength. Then we won't let Rebecca or anyone else threaten what we have. The morning brought a crisp chill that hinted at the approaching winter. Eleanor rose early as usual, her mind still aglow with Wyatt's declaration of love. The words had transformed something within her, cementing her place in this home, in this family. No matter what Rebecca might say or do, Eleanor now knew with certainty that she belonged. She was mixing biscuit dough when Rebecca appeared, already dressed in a fashionable day dress that seemed absurdly formal for ranch life. You're up early, Eleanor observed mildly. I've never been one to idle in bed, Rebecca replied, pouring herself coffee. Besides, I wanted to speak with you privately. Eleanor continued working the dough, her hands steady despite the sudden tension in her shoulders. What about? Rebecca sat at the table, arranging her skirts with deliberate precision. I've been observing you these past days. You seem earnest in your attempts to be a suitable wife and mother. I don't attempt to be Sarah's mother, Eleanor corrected gently. I am her mother now, by her choice as well as mine and Wyatt's. A flicker of annoyance crossed Rebecca's face. Let's not mince words, Eleanor. You're her stepmother. A convenient replacement, not blood family. Family isn't always about blood, Rebecca. Eleanor shaped the biscuits with practiced movements. It's about love, commitment, daily acts of care. How charmingly sentimental, Rebecca murmured, but ultimately naive. Blood connections endure when other ties fade, which brings me to my purpose. Eleanor placed the biscuits in the oven before turning to face her fully. And what purpose is that? I believe Sarah would be better served by coming to live with me in Boston. Rebecca's tone was conversational, as if suggesting nothing more controversial than a change in dinner plan. I can provide her with advantages this ... rustic existence simply cannot offer. Proper schooling, cultural refinements, social connections that will serve her throughout life. Though she had suspected this was coming, the actual proposal still stunned Eleanor. Sarah's home is here with her father. With me. For now, perhaps. But consider her future, Eleanor. What will become of her raised in this wilderness? A rancher's wife at best, trapped in the same limited existence as her father, as you. Rebecca's gaze was sharp, assessing. Is that truly what you want for her? What I want, Eleanor said carefully, is for Sarah to grow up loved and secure, knowing her worth isn't measured by social standing or refined manners, but by the goodness in her heart, noble sentiments. Rebecca's smile was thin, but practically speaking, her prospects here are severely limited. In Boston, with my connections, she could marry well, perhaps even into society. Elizabeth would have wanted that for her daughter. You didn't know Elizabeth as well as you think, if you believe that. Wyatt's voice came from the doorway, his expression thunderous. My wife chose this life freely, and she was happy here. Rebecca turned, unruffled by his anger. She was making the best of her circumstances, Wyatt. Elizabeth was raised for better things, as was I, as Sarah should be. Sarah isn't going anywhere, Wyatt stated flatly. She stays with us. Perhaps you should consider what's truly best for her, rather than what's convenient for you, Rebecca suggested, her voice taking on a harder edge. After all, what can this mail-order bride possibly offer that would compare to the advantages I can provide? Eleanor flinched at the dismissive description, but Wyatt's response was immediate and fierce. Eleanor is my wife, not some temporary arrangement. She loves Sarah as her own, and Sarah loves her. That's worth more than all your Boston advantages. Rebecca's eyes narrowed. You barely know this woman. She arrived, what, 6 weeks ago? And suddenly she's the perfect mother for my niece? I think not. It doesn't matter what you think, Wyatt said coldly. Sarah is my daughter, and she stays with me and Eleanor. Rebecca stood, smoothing her skirts. We'll see about that. I had hoped to handle this amicably, but you leave me no choice. She withdrew an envelope from her pocket and placed it on the table. My solicitor will be returning in 1 week. I expect you'll have reconsidered by then. After she swept from the room, Wyatt picked up the envelope and extracted a formal-looking document. As he read, his face paled. What is it? Eleanor asked, dread pooling in her stomach. A petition for guardianship, he said hoarsely. She's claiming I'm an unfit father, that the ranch is an unsafe environment for a young girl, that Sarah lacks proper education and feminine influence. His hands shook with suppressed rage. She's threatening to take me to court if I don't voluntarily send Sarah to Boston with her. Eleanor felt as though the floor had dropped away beneath her. Can she do that? Take Sarah legally? I don't know. Wyatt sank into a chair, the document crumpled in his fist. Courts tend to favor blood relatives, especially wealthy ones who can provide advantages. But you're her father, Eleanor protested. A widowed father who married a stranger after a few letters, Wyatt pointed out grimly. Rebecca will make that sound suspicious. Desperate. She twists everything to suit her purpose. Eleanor's mind raced. There must be something we can do. People who can vouch for your character, for our home. Pastor Simmons, Wyatt said, beginning to think practically. The Carsons, maybe a few others from town. But Rebecca has money, connections. He looked up at Eleanor, fear evident in his eyes. Can't lose Sarah. She's everything to me. We won't lose her, Eleanor said firmly, though her own heart was racing with fear. We'll fight this together. They were interrupted by the sound of small feet. Sarah appeared in the doorway, still in her nightgown, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Mama? Biscuits smell like they're burning, Eleanor gasped, hurrying to rescue breakfast. Wyatt quickly tucked the document into his pocket, forcing a smile for his daughter. Good morning, Pumpkin. Sleep well? Sarah nodded, climbing onto his lap. I dreamed about horses. Can we go riding today? Aunt Rebecca said she used to ride with my first mama all the time. Maybe this afternoon, Wyatt said, stroking her sleep-tousled hair. I have some work to do this morning. As Eleanor served breakfast, she observed Rebecca carefully. The woman seemed perfectly composed, making pleasant conversation as if she hadn't just threatened to tear their family apart. Only the occasional triumphant glance in Eleanor's direction betrayed her satisfaction with the morning's developments. Later, while Sarah was showing Rebecca her collection of prairie flowers, Wyatt pulled Eleanor aside. I need to ride into town, speak with Pastor Simmons, maybe see if there's a lawyer who can advise us. Of course, Eleanor squeezed his arm reassuringly. I'll keep watch here. Be careful, he warned. Rebecca's clever and determined. Don't let her provoke you into saying something she could use against us. After he left, Eleanor busied herself with household tasks, keeping one eye on Sarah and Rebecca through the window. They were walking toward the small apple orchard, Rebecca holding Sarah's hand possessively. The sight sent a chill through Eleanor that had nothing to do with the autumn air. That afternoon, while Sarah napped, Rebecca cornered Eleanor in the kitchen. "I hope you understand this isn't personal," she said, her tone falsely conciliatory. "I simply want what's best for my niece." "If that were true," Eleanor replied evenly, "you wouldn't be trying to separate her from her father. Wyatt could visit," Rebecca shrugged. "But Sarah belongs in civilization, not this wilderness. Elizabeth would never have wanted her daughter raised like a savage. From what I understand of Elizabeth, she chose this life freely and loved it." Eleanor met Rebecca's gaze steadily. She saw value in things you dismiss: honest work, natural beauty, genuine community. Something flickered in Rebecca's eyes, anger perhaps, or an older, deeper resentment. Elizabeth was naive. She threw away every advantage our family provided, every connection, every opportunity. For what? To be a rancher's wife? To die in childbirth in the middle of nowhere? Her voice cracked slightly, revealing genuine grief beneath her polished exterior. In that moment, Eleanor understood. "You blame Wyatt for her death. If she had stayed in Boston, had proper medical care, ... Rebecca looked away, composing herself. "It doesn't matter now. What matters is Sarah. I won't let her make the same mistakes her mother did, even if it means tearing her away from the father she adores, from the only home she's ever known." Eleanor shook her head. "That's not love, Rebecca. That's control." Single quotes. Rebecca's eyes hardened. "You know nothing about it. You've been here, what, 6 weeks? You play at being a frontier wife, at being a mother to a child who isn't yours. But when winter comes with its blizzards and isolation, when illness strikes with no doctor for 50 miles, when Sarah grows beyond what this primitive place can offer her, then we'll see how your romantic notions hold up." Eleanor refused to be baited. Life here has challenges, yes, but it also has joys and meaning that can't be measured by Boston standards. Sarah is thriving, for now perhaps, but I'm thinking of her future. Rebecca's tone grew falsely sympathetic. "I understand this is difficult for you. You've found security here, a position you desperately needed. But surely, if you truly care for Sarah, you'll consider what's best for her long-term prospects." The implication was clear, that Eleanor's attachment to Sarah was self-serving rather than genuine love. The accusation stung, but Eleanor maintained her composure. "I consider what's best for Sarah every day," she replied calmly. "And what's best is that she remains with her father, in the home she knows, surrounded by people who love her for who she is, not for who they wish her to be." Rebecca's lips thinned. "We'll let the courts decide that, shall we? I think you'll find that a respectable widow with means and social standing has a stronger claim to guardianship than a mail-order bride with no background to speak of." Before Eleanor could respond, they heard the sound of hoofbeats. Wyatt had returned from town. The relief that flooded through Eleanor was tempered by anxiety over what news he might bring. He entered, looking weary but determined. Rebecca excused herself with cool politeness, leaving husband and wife alone. "What did you learn?" Eleanor asked softly. Wyatt ran a hand through his hair. "Nothing good. There's no proper lawyer in town, just Davis, who handles land disputes and wills. He says Rebecca might have a case, especially if she can convince a judge that Sarah would have superior opportunities in Boston." His voice was bitter, as if being wealthy makes someone a better parent. "Did you speak with Pastor Simmons?" "Yes, and he'll vouch for us. So will the Carsons and several others in town. But Rebecca's solicitor is from a prestigious Boston firm." Davis seemed intimidated just hearing the name. Eleanor's heart sank. "What can we do?" "Fight," Wyatt said firmly. "I won't give up my daughter without a fight." That evening, tension hung over the supper table like a thundercloud. Sarah, sensitive to the adult undercurrents, was unusually quiet. After the meal, she asked to be excused to play with her dolls, both Matilda and the new porcelain doll from Rebecca. "She's overtired," Rebecca commented as Sarah left the room. "A regular bedtime routine is essential for a child's development. In Boston, my household runs on a precise schedule." "Sarah has a regular routine," Eleanor replied evenly, "but occasionally exceptions are made. Life isn't always predictable on a ranch. All the more reason why a more structured environment would benefit her," Rebecca countered smoothly. Wyatt's patience snapped. "That's enough, Rebecca. This is our home, and Sarah is our daughter. Your opinions on how we raise her aren't welcome or needed." Single quotes. Rebecca's smile was cold. "Your defensiveness speaks volumes. Wyatt, I wonder what a judge would make of your temper. I wonder what a judge would make of a woman who appears after 5 years of absence, having never so much as sent her niece a birthday card, suddenly claiming deep familial concern." Eleanor said quietly. Rebecca flushed. "I was in Europe. Communication was difficult. Yet you managed your business affairs just fine from abroad," Wyatt pointed out. "The truth is, you didn't care about Sarah until you realized you could use her to salve your guilt over Elizabeth." "How dare you?" Rebecca hissed. "I loved my sister. Everything I'm doing is for her daughter's welfare." "No," Eleanor said, her voice gentle but firm. "Everything you're doing is for yourself. You want to reshape Sarah into Elizabeth to somehow make amends for not being here when you're sick. But Sarah isn't Elizabeth. She's herself, unique, precious, and exactly where she belongs." Rebecca stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "This conversation is pointless. My solicitor will return in a few days, and then we'll settle this matter properly." She stalked from the room, leaving a heavy silence in her wake. Later that night, as Wyatt and Eleanor prepared for bed, he pulled her into his arms, his embrace conveying both gratitude and desperation. "I can't lose her," he he whispered against Eleanor's hair. Can't lose either. Eleanor held him tightly. You won't. We'll find a way. Sleep came fitfully that night, troubled by worries and half-formed plans. Eleanor woke before dawn, her mind still churning. Slipping from bed, careful not to wake Wyatt, she wrapped herself in a shawl and stepped onto the porch. The prairie stretched before her, bathed in the silvery light of pre-dawn. The vastness that had once terrified her now felt like freedom, like possibility. This land had taught her strength she hadn't known she possessed. A small sound behind her made Eleanor turn. Sarah stood in the doorway, Matilda clutched in one arm and the porcelain doll in the other. "Mama, are you sad?" the child asked, her voice small in the morning stillness. Eleanor smiled, opening her arms. Sarah came to her immediately, nestling against her side as they sat together on the porch step. "Not sad, exactly," Eleanor answered truthfully. "Just thinking about some grown-up problems." Sarah nodded solemnly. "About Aunt Rebecca wanting to take me to Boston?" Startled, Eleanor looked down at the child. "You know about that? I heard her tell you and Papa." Sarah's brow furrowed. "I don't want to go to Boston. I want to stay here with you and Papa." Relief washed through Eleanor. Despite Rebecca's gifts and blandishments, Sarah's heart remained true to her home. "We want you to stay too, sweetheart, more than anything." Sarah held up her dolls. "Matilda doesn't want to go either, but Lady Amelia might." She wiggled the porcelain doll. "She likes fancy dresses and parties." Eleanor smiled at the child's perception. "Lady Amelia is very beautiful. And Rebecca gave you a lovely gift." "She's pretty, but she breaks easy," Sarah said pragmatically. "Matilda never breaks, even when I take her to the barn or sleep with her when it's raining." She looked up at Eleanor. "Why does Aunt Rebecca want me to go with her? Doesn't she know I belong here?" The question, so innocent yet profound, lodged in Eleanor's heart. "Sometimes adults get confused about what's really important," she explained gently. "Aunt Rebecca loves you, but she thinks that fancy things in city life would make you happier." "But I'm already happy," Sarah insisted. "I have you and Papa and Matilda and the chickens and my secret skywatching place." Her small face grew serious. "Aunt Rebecca looks like my first mama, but she doesn't feel like a mama. You feel like a mama." Tears pricked Eleanor's eyes. "What does a mama feel like, sweetheart?" Sarah considered this carefully. "Warm, safe, like home, but in a person." She nodded, satisfied with her explanation. "You're my home person, Mama." Eleanor gathered the child close, her heart full. "And you're mine, Sarah. You and your Papa both." They sat together, watching the sun rise, casting golden light across the prairie grass. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Eleanor knew with bone-deep certainty that this was where she belonged, where they all belong. Later that morning, as Eleanor was teaching Sarah her letters at the kitchen table, they heard the sound of an approaching wagon. Wyatt, who had been repairing a chair nearby, went to the window. "It's Rebecca's solicitor," he said grimly. "A week early." Eleanor's stomach tightened with apprehension. Why would he return early? "I don't know. Nothing good, I expect." Wyatt's jaw was set in a hard line. Rebecca appeared from her room, looking smugly triumphant. Mr. Jenkins is ahead of schedule." "Excellent." The solicitor was a thin, austere man with spectacles and a perpetual frown. He greeted Rebecca formally before addressing Wyatt. "Mr. Morgan, I've come to finalize arrangements for Miss Thorne's guardianship petition. The necessary paperwork has been prepared for your signature." "I'm not signing anything," Wyatt stated flatly. "Sarah stays with us." Mr. Jenkins sighed as if dealing with a recalcitrant child. "I had hoped to resolve this amicably, but Miss Thorne anticipated your resistance." Here produced another document from his case. "This is a summons to appear before Judge Harmon in Council Bluffs next Tuesday. Miss Thorne has filed for emergency temporary guardianship pending a full hearing." The blood drained from Wyatt's face. "Emergency guardianship? On what grounds?" "Concerns for the child's welfare in light of your hasty remarriage to a woman of questionable background," Mr. Jenkins replied dispassionately. "Miss Thorne has also raised concerns about the child's education, healthcare access, and general safety on an isolated ranch as winter approaches." "That's absurd," Eleanor protested. "Sarah is thriving here. She's loved and well cared for." Mr. Jenkins barely glanced at her. "The court will make that determination, madam." The journey to Council Bluffs was tense and silent. They traveled in the Morgan wagon while Rebecca and her solicitor followed in their rented carriage. Sarah sat between Wyatt and Eleanor, her small face solemn. Matilda clutched tightly to her chest. She had refused to bring the porcelain doll. "Will the judge make me go away with Aunt Rebecca?" she asked quietly as the town came into view. "No," Wyatt said firmly, though Eleanor could hear the fear beneath his confidence. "We won't let that happen." They stayed at a modest hotel, Sarah sleeping between them in the narrow bed. In the morning, they dressed in their best clothes, Wyatt in his wedding suit, Eleanor in her blue dress, now carefully mended and pressed. Sarah wore the dress Mrs. Carson had made for her last Christmas, her hair tied back with a ribbon. The courthouse was imposing, its stone facade speaking of permanence and authority. Inside, the polished wood and hushed voices created an atmosphere that made Eleanor's throat tight with apprehension. Rebecca was already there, elegant in a fashionable traveling suit, her solicitor at her side. Judge Harmon was a stern-looking man with a thick gray beard and piercing eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He reviewed the documents before him with methodical care before addressing the room. This is a petition for emergency temporary guardianship of the minor child Sarah Elizabeth Morgan, filed by her maternal aunt, Miss Rebecca Thorne of Boston, Massachusetts. Miss Thorne alleges concerns about the child's welfare in the custody of her father, Mr. Wyatt Morgan, particularly in light of his recent marriage to ... single quotes. He peered at the document. Mrs. Eleanor Bennett Morgan, a mail-order bride with whom he corresponded briefly before marriage. Eleanor felt the weight of the judge's gaze as it moved to her, assessing, evaluating. She straightened her spine, meeting his eyes directly. Miss Thorne, you claim that the child would be better served in your custody due to educational opportunities, access to medical care, and the advantages of city life. Is that correct? Rebecca stepped forward, her expression appropriately concerned. Yes, Your Honor. My niece deserves every opportunity that her mother would have wanted for her. My sister was raised in refinement and culture. Sarah should have the same advantages. Judge Harmon turned to Wyatt. Mr. Morgan, you contest this petition? I do, Your Honor, Wyatt said, his voice steady despite his clenched hands. Sarah belongs with me, with us. Her home is on the ranch where she was born, where her mother chose to live, and you believe your home provides adequately for her needs? Miss Thorne suggests the environment is potentially dangerous, isolated, lacking in female influence until your recent marriage. Sarah has never lacked for anything essential, Your Honor. She's healthy, happy, well-loved. As for female influence, Mrs. S.E.'s, Carson has been like a grandmother to her since her mother died. And now she has Eleanor. The judge's attention shifted. Mrs. Morgan, you've been married to Mr. Morgan for how long? 6 weeks, Your Honor, Eleanor replied. And before that? Miss Thorne's petition suggests your background is ... unclear. Eleanor took a deep breath. I lived in Boston with my aunt until her death last winter. My father was Professor William Bennett of Harvard University. After my parents died of influenza, my aunt raised. When she passed, I had few options. Mr. Morgan's advertisement seemed a chance for a new beginning. So you admit this was a marriage of convenience? Rebecca interjected. It began that way, Eleanor acknowledged, her voice growing stronger. But it has become much more. I love Sarah as my own daughter. I love my husband. We're a family. Judge Harmon studied her thoughtfully. 6 weeks is a very short time to form such attachment. Time isn't always the measure of love. Your Honor, Eleanor said quietly. Some bonds form quickly but run deep. The judge turned his attention to the child who sat quietly between the adults. Sarah, would you come forward, please? Sarah approached the bench, Matilda still clutched in her arms. The judge's stern expression softened slightly. Sarah, do you understand why we're here today? She nodded solemnly. Aunt Rebecca wants me to go to Boston with her, but I want to stay home with Papa and Mama. You call Mrs. Morgan Mama? Yes, sir. She is my Mama now. And you understand that she's not your birth mother? That your first mother died when you were a baby? Sarah nodded again. Papa told me all about my first Mama. She's in heaven, but Mama Eleanor is here, and she loves me just the same, I see. The judge leaned back, considering. Miss Thorne, you claim a blood connection to the child and superior resources. Mr. and Mrs. Morgan claim established bonds and the child's clear preference. This is not a simple matter. Rebecca stepped forward. Your Honor, I have letters from prominent Boston physicians, educators, and social reformers, all attesting to the advantages Sarah would have in my care. And I have these, Wyatt countered, producing a bundle of papers from his pocket. Letters from our neighbors, from Pastor Simmons, from our doctor in Prairie Junction, all testifying to Sarah's well-being and our fitness as parents. The judge accepted both sets of documents, reviewing them carefully. The courtroom was silent save for the ticking of the large clock on the wall. Finally, he looked up. Miss Thorne, your concern for your niece's welfare appears genuine, if belated. However, I see no evidence of neglect or unfitness in the Morgan household that would justify removing a child from her father's custody, particularly against her clearly expressed wish. Relief flooded through Eleanor, but the judge wasn't finished. That said, the child's education and cultural development are legitimate concern. Mrs. Morgan, you have an educated background. What provisions have you made for Sarah's schooling? I've begun teaching her reading, writing, and numbers, Eleanor explained. We've ordered books from Chicago, and Pastor Simmons has offered access to his library. When she's older, there's a proper school in Prairie Junction. And what a feminine accomplishment. Miss Thorne suggests the ranch is too isolated for proper social development. Eleanor thought of Sarah's joyful interaction with the natural world, her kindness to animals, her innate empathy. Sarah is learning skills appropriate to her environment, Your Honor. She's also learning values no finishing school could teach: courage, resourcefulness, compassion. As for society, we have a community of neighbors who watch out for one another. What could be more civilized than that? Something like approval flickered in the judge's eyes. Well said, Mrs. Morgan. He turned to Rebecca. Miss Thorne, I'm denying your petition for emergency guardianship. The child will remain with her father and stepmother. Rebecca's face flushed with anger. This is outrageous. I can provide her with things, the judge interrupted. You can provide her with things, Miss Thorne, but Mr. and Mrs. Morgan are providing her with a home. There's a difference. He tapped his gavel. Case dismissed. Outside the courthouse, Sarah twirled with joy in the autumn sunshine, the weight of worry lifted from her small shoulders. Wyatt pulled Eleanor close, his relief palpable. "It's over," he murmured against her hair. "We're going home." Rebecca approached, her expression tightly controlled. "This isn't finished," she warned. "I'll appeal. I'll bring a full case. You could. Wyatt acknowledged, but it would only hurt Sarah. "Is that what you really want?" Something flickered in Rebecca's eyes, doubt, perhaps, or reluctant recognition. She looked at Sarah dancing with Matilda in the courthouse square, her face alight with happiness. Elizabeth loved her so much, Rebecca said softly. Just wanted to do right by her memory, then honor her choice, Eleanor suggested gently. Elizabeth chose this life, this place. She saw its value, its beauty. Sarah is her daughter in spirit as well as blood. Let her grow where she was planted. Rebecca was silent for a long moment. Perhaps ... Perhaps I could visit occasionally. Get to know her without taking her away. You'd be welcome, Eleanor said, surprising herself with the sincerity of the offer. Sarah should know her mother's family. They returned to the ranch as the sun was setting, the familiar silhouette of the house a welcome sight after the tension of the past days. Wyatt tended to the horses. Eleanor and Sarah entered the house, the familiar warmth embracing them. Sarah turned to Eleanor suddenly, her expression earnest. "Mama, I want to ask you something important." Eleanor knelt to meet the child at eye level. "What is it, sweetheart?" Sarah took a deep breath, her small hands clasping Eleanor's. "Can you be my mama forever and ever? Not just until I grow up, but always?" Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes as she gathered the child close. "Yes, Sarah, forever and always. Nothing will ever change that." Single quotes from the doorway. Wyatt watched them, his heart full. The late afternoon light streamed through the window, illuminating his wife and daughter in a golden glow. The sight before him, Eleanor kneeling with Sarah in her arms, their faces alight with love, was more beautiful than anything he could have imagined when he'd penned that first letter months ago. He'd advertised for a practical arrangement, a woman willing to be wife and mother out of necessity. Instead, he'd found a family, bound not by obligation, but by love freely given and gratefully received. As he stepped into the room to join them, Wyatt knew with certainty that they were home, all of them, together, exactly where they belonged.